what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chaf Aleph of Masechta Pesachim, Daf 21. Some of the stuff we're going to discuss today is the sugya of takala. Are we concerned that something bad can happen? Is that like how we should say it? But it's a continuation of yesterday's sugya at the end about being concerned that people might consume truma tameya. So that is the first kind of sugya we're going to get to. We begin the new perek. So goodbye to the first perek of Pesachim. I think for 2/3 of it, it was pretty cool and pretty chilled. And then we got to some Tuma and Tara stuff, which was difficult, but we're going to wrap that up today, and we'll keep on going weiter. Some of the sugyas that we're going to get to in the next perek, in the second perek, selling hametz to a Gentile before Pesach. An interesting machlokas between Chizkiah and Rabbi Abo about how do we relate to Isser Achila and Isser Hana'a when you're not allowed to eat things. That's going to be interesting. And then by Nevela, when there's a dead animal that was not shechted, so what can you do with it? So these are kind of interesting little sugya things. Let us begin. We are going to start on Daf Chaf Umad Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. V'takala atzma tanoihi. So we had said yesterday, at the end of the day, that there was an idea that when it comes to like having some wine around, right? Are we concerned that if you have like some wine of truma that's tameh just lying around, so you might end up drinking it, and therefore you have to throw it away. And that's why we said that if you have some, like a barrel of wine on the top of a wine press, and then it breaks, and it's truma, and it's going to fall into some wine on the bottom, which is chulin tmein. And the thing is that once that wine on the bottom gets mixed with the truma, and it's going to be truma tmeya, well then you're going to have to throw it out because there's nothing that you can do with it, and we're concerned that you might end up drinking it, and therefore just get rid of it. Even if it's new, and then maybe you can wait and then use it for fragrance, whatever it is, we're concerned you might end up drinking it, get rid of it. So this idea of being concerned about having something like, let's say, wine of Truma Tmeya around, we want to say it's machlokas tanoim. So v'takala atzma tanoi, the Tanyas, we learn in the Brayso chav shel yain shel truma shenitmes. If you have a barrel of truma wine that becomes tameh, b'shami om tishafei chevel, so b'shami says you got to spill it all out. Beisil om teos ziluf, and Beisil says that you can use it for its fragrance. You can kind of like sprinkle it. Bishma Rabbi Yossi ani achriya, says Bishma Rabbi Yossi, I'm gonna compromise. I'm gonna show how really they could both be right. What does that mean? So it depends. If this barrel of Truma Tmeya wine is in the field, and in the field, what are you going to do with it? You can't sprinkle it, so there's no fragrance that you need for it. So we're concerned that you might end up, even if you're taking it home, you might end up drinking it. We say just spill it out. Whereas babai is teos ziluf. But if it's inside of your house, then we can hold like Beis Shammai that you could sprinkle it for a very beautiful winey fragrance. To those who say that you could say that we hold like Beis Shammai that you spill it out if it is new wine, that you're going to have to wait for it to get old before you could sprinkle it, and therefore we're concerned that you might end up drinking it, which is a problem. But b'yashon, if it's old wine that you could just sprinkle immediately, so in teos ziluf, no problem, you could use it for sprinkling. So we see that Rabbi Yossi is explaining the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel as really being about takala. That if it's a situation where we have to be concerned about takala, it'll be like Beis Shammai that you spill it out immediately. If it's a situation where you can just be sprinkling it, so then we'll say like Beis Hillel, and you can use it for sprinkling. Amrulo, they said to Rabbi Yossi, Einachra Shlishis Machras. The Chacham, so they said to Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, that ain't gonna work. It's not a good compromise. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel didn't say anything about takala, and therefore they said to Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, don't start making this a whole takala thing. But we see that Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi holds of takala, right, and understands this as being a takala thing. So, they said to Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, look, if we just want to be objective about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they didn't say anything about takala, so don't make it into takala thing. But we see that Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi though is concerned about takala, and that's why he wants to read that into the machlokus between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So we see that Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi does hold of the concept of takala. The other chacham seem to not hold of it. Okay. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, says Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, machlokas shenafla lepachus mimei sa chulin tmein avonafla lemei chulin tmein tivrehakol tered v'titame v'hitamena biyad. Guys, got that? Good. Let's go weiter. Just kidding. Let's read that slowly. Machlokas. So what machlokas are we talking about? We're talking about this thing that we've been talking about. You have the wine vat, and you have the wine press, and you have the barrel on top, and it's truma, and on the bottom there's the chulin tmein, and the barrel on top breaks, and it's going to get mixed together with the chulin tmein. Machlokas between Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. So we're saying machlokas, this machlokas between Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer, where Rabbi Eliezer says you just got to let the truma fall into the chulin below, and there's nothing you can do about it. And Rabbi Yehoshua says, well, you could salvage, you could collect all the truma from the top barrel into tamei kalim in order to salvage the chulin tameya on the bottom. So that is shenafla lepachos mimei sa chulin tamein. So that's really only if the vat below, the lower part of the wine press, has less than 100 sa'a of chulin tmein, because then it would be what's called meduma, right? Meduma is when you have a mixture of truma and chulin. So if it's going to be meduma, i.e. less than, so if it's going to be meduma, so then that is where Rabbi Yehoshua says, look, salvage it from becoming meduma, which you wouldn't be allowed to eat midrabanan, and therefore you could salvage it with these tamei kalim, even though you're going to be metame the truma from the chavis that's on top. However, there is a halacha that we already learned about in Masechta Shabbos. I think Masechta Shabbos there was a very confusing Gemara about meduma, but we know that meduma, if there are 100 times chulin more than there are truma, so then the truma becomes batal. Midoraisa, it's batal by a majority. It will be batal barov. But midorabanan, we say that if some truma falls into chulin, it becomes inedible. It's meduma. However, if there's 100 times the amount of chulin than there is truma, so then you can eat it anyways. So what we're saying now is that if we're talking about a situation where there were 100 times the amount of chulin than there were truma, and that even if this truma falls into the chulin, you would still be allowed to eat it anyways, well then, in that case, so then aval nafla lemea chulin tmein, but if this barrel of truma wine is falling into 100 times that amount of chulin tmein, well then, deviakol tered v'titam v'alitam in a biyad, well then just let the truma fall into the chulin. Do not be mitami the truma on your own, because even when it falls into the chulin, you'll still be allowed to eat it because it'll be batal. Tanya Namiyachi, we learn in a brayso like this: if you have a barrel that breaks in the top part of the wine press, and below there are 100 times the amount of chulin tmein. So Rabbi Eliezer admits to Rabbi Yehoshua that if he's able to find some pure kalim in which to collect at least a revius of the truma wine from the top, well then do that, and don't use tamei kalim. V'im lav, but if you don't have access to tahor kalim, well then tered v'titami v'hitamena biyad, well then let it fall into the wine below, since even once it falls into the wine below, it's going to be batal anyways, and you'll still be able to drink it. So then certainly do not be metame it biyad. So now you may have been thinking, what do you mean Rabbi Eliezer admits to Rabbi Yoshua? It should be the other way around. Rabbi Yoshua, who says that under certain circumstances you'd be allowed to be metame the truma, admits to Rabbi Eliezer that in this case you would not be metame it. So why is it that Rabbi Eliezer admitting to Rabbi Yoshua? So I'm Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Eliezer mibayle. It should really be the other way around, that Rabbi Yoshua is admitting to Rabbi Eliezer that in this case, since there's 100 times the amount of chulin than there is truma, so in this case, Rabbi Yoshua admits to Rabbi Eliezer that you should not be mitame the truma on top with this tamei kli. So I'm Rabbi Epoch. So Rabbi says, okay, just flip it around. It's Rabbi Yoshua admitting to Rabbi Eliezer. Rav Huna bar Rabbi Yoshua amar d'olam lo tepoch. Rav Huna bar Rabbi Yoshua says, no, really, don't flip it around. It is Rabbi Eliezer admitting to Rabbi Yoshua. So what's he admitting? Hacham ma'askinim b'chli shetocho tar v'gabu tamei ma'adutei manigzor d'managa gabo b'truma kamash malan. So says Rav Huna bar Rabbi Yoshua that here we're actually talking about the reisha, the first part, that when you can find a kli, a vessel that is tahor, so then you're allowed to so then salvage the truma from the top, right? And what we're saying is that Rabbi Eliezer says, and this is even b'chli shetoch. Well, the Gemara says that Rabbi Eliezer is saying this even b'chli shetoch otor v'gabu tameh. This is even if the inside of the kli is tahor, but the outside of it is tameh, right? We know that this can happen midrabanan, right? For example, if you have mashkin that are a rishon, they can be metame kli, a kli to be a sheni, but it's only from the outside, if it touches the outside, right? So if you have a kli that midrabanan is tameh on the outside, but the inside is tahor, well then you would still be allowed to use that kli to collect, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, who's more stringent, you would still be allowed to use that kli to collect the truma from the top and salvage it from falling into the chulin at the bottom. I may have thought nigzar dilma naga gabo b'truma kamash malan. I may have thought that maybe we should make a gezerah, that what if the outside of the kli touches the truma that is being salvaged into it, then it'll be metame the truma. So we say kamash malan, that no, even Rabbi Eliezer admits to Rabbi Yoshua that in that case, use the kli that the inside is tahor and the outside is tameh. Don't worry about the outside being metame the truma. Well, Hadron Lach or L'Arba Asar. On that note, we'll come back to or L'Arba Asar, but maybe just the first 2/3. But who knows? Maybe also the last third. It was fun, right? Okay. So, as long as you're allowed to eat chametz, okay, well then you're also allowed to feed chametz to your animal, to your beast, to birds. You could sell it to Gentiles, also, and you're permitted to get benefit from it over zmanu, once you're no longer, once the time has passed. Also, you are not permitted to get any benefit from him. Do not use it to light an oven or a stove. Okay, fine. The Gemara is going to ask, well, if you can't get enough from it, then obviously you can't light an oven or stove. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, in bir chametz el sreifa, that the only way to eliminate chametz is by burning it. Chacham Omer, and Chacham say, af mifar v'zor leruach u'matal yom, you can even make it into crumbs or scatter it and throw it into the wind and throw it into the sea. Okay, so Yehuda says that the only way to burn chametz is to get rid of chametz is to burn it, and I think we saw that I think Rava had said earlier on that that would be Rabbi Akiva's opinion as well. The Chacham say that you can even just get rid of it, throw it into the sea or something. Okay, says the Gemara, Kol shash mutalecho maichil. So now this is a Gemara that we had seen already a few days ago. That this Mishnah over here is saying that Kol shash mutalecho maichil, that as long as you're allowed to eat chametz, you can feed it to your animal. which implies that as long as you are not allowed to eat it, well then you cannot feed it. Okay, fine. Well, lema masnisin lo Rabbi Yehuda. Well, then this sounds like it's not like Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda, because if it is Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, of course, as we know from Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, Rabbi Yehuda says that you're allowed to eat chametz on Erev Pesach until the 5th hour, and then in the entire 5th hour you're not allowed to eat chametz. You don't have to burn it yet, but you're not allowed to eat it. But you would be allowed to feed it to your animals, and then in the 6th hour you burn it. Ditnan, as we learn in the Mishnah, Meir Omer says, Meir Ochlin Kol Chametz V'Sarfim T'chilas Sheish, that Meir says that you're allowed to eat chametz all the way up until the 6th hour, and then you start burning it. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Ochlin Kol Arba, you're allowed to eat for the duration of the 4th hour, but when comes the 5th hour, V'Tolin Kol Chamesh, then for the 5th hour, you just, you can't eat it, but you don't have to burn it. You have a V'Sarfim B'Tchilas Sheish, then you burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. So we see that the 5th hour, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're not allowed to eat anymore, but you could still feed it to your animals. So this Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda, because this Mishnah is saying as long as you're allowed to eat it, you could feed it. But once you're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to feed it. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says that there's actually a period of the 5th hour where you're not allowed to eat it, but you are allowed to feed it. So Velamai Reb Meri. Well, I think you can really technically read it as a question. Velamai Reb Meri. So what are we going to say? That this Mishnah then is Reb Meir, who says that you're allowed to eat up until the 6th hour, and then we'll say that comes the 6th hour, you're not allowed to eat it anymore, and you're also not allowed to feed it. Okay. But interesting. So the Gemara wants to make a very particular diuk, which is that if the Mishnah was like Reb Meir, that Reb Meir says that you're allowed to eat chametz up until the 6th hour and then you burn it, and if this Mishnah was like him, well then it wouldn't say kol shashe muter le'echol ma'achil. That word mutter is kind of extra. Technically, all you needed to say is kol shashe ochel ma'achil. As long as you can eat chametz, you can feed it to your animal. You can't eat chametz anymore, you can't feed it to your animal. What's that word mutter? You don't really need it. So, Amar Rabbi Bar Ula, Masnis Rabbi Gamliel hi. So it says Rabbi Bar Ula that actually the author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Gamliel, and what it means is this. Ditnan, Rabbi Gamliel, Omer says Rabbi Gamliel, Chulin ne'echolin kol arba. We learned this on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis as well, that you can eat chulin throughout the 4th hour on Erev Pesach, truma kol chamesh. Now, during the entire 5th hour, you're not allowed to eat chulin anymore, but kohanim can eat truma. V'sarfim b'tchilas sheish, then at the beginning of the 6th hour, you then burn all the remaining chametz. V'achi ka'amar, and this is what our Mishnah is saying over here, that kol shashe muter lechol kohen b'truma, as long as a kohen is allowed to eat truma, i.e. in the 5th hour, when a Yisrael is no longer allowed to eat chulin, well really nobody's allowed to eat chulin, but a kohen is muter to eat truma, Yisrael ma'achil chulin levehema l'chayev le'ofis, well then during that time, a Yisrael is still allowed to feed chulin, i.e. just regular old chametz, to his animals and birds and stuff. So we see that the author of our Mishnah is actually Rabbi Gamliel. And when it says kol shashe muter le'echol ma'achil levehema l'chayev le'ofis, it means that as long as somebody is mutar to eat, i.e. a kohen is mutar to eat truma, even though nobody else is allowed to eat chametz, during that time you would still be allowed to feed your animals with it, and it's referring to the 5th hour. Okay? Technically, Rabbi Yehuda Mistama would agree with that, but just to be specific, it is Rabbi Gamliel. Okay? Lamali lemisna behema, lamali lemisna chaya. So now the Gemara wants to know, how come the Mishnah had to teach behema and chaya? A domesticated animal and an undomesticated animal. Wouldn't it be enough to teach one of them, that as long as you're allowed to eat, you can feed a behema? Why do we also need chaya? So the Gemara answers tzricha. You actually do need both of them. How come? Titana behema. If the Mishnah would only teach that you're allowed to feed behemas, well, the imshayra chazila, an animal, whatever it does, a domesticated animal, maybe, I don't know, a cow, I guess, whatever it doesn't eat, it's just going to leave there in front of it. And you'll see it. and you'll remember to get rid of it. Right? We're talking about Erev Pesach over here. So you want to make sure that if you're feeding your animal chametz, whatever it doesn't eat, you want to get rid of it. And an animal, whatever it doesn't eat, it's just going to leave it. But an undomesticated animal, actually though, I think actually we're talking about actually like weasels and stuff, like from the other day. Right? If you have like a chulda, like a weasel. So, and we talked about this the other day, right? About the weasels kind of recognizing, after the Yidden have burnt their chametz and they'll realize that there's less chametz around. Anyways, so these chayas, so then I think that's actually what we said. What does Rashi say? Chulda. Interesting that it's calling chaya, a chaya, because chulda is usually like a classic, like sheretz kind of thing. Anyways, whatever it doesn't eat, it's going to hide away. And therefore, so if we would only say an animal, that you're allowed to feed an animal, I would think, okay, because an animal, whatever it doesn't eat, it'll leave over, and you'll be able to see, and you can get rid of it. But a chaya, whatever it doesn't eat, it's going to hide away. And therefore, maybe that would be a problem, right? Because it would be an issue about yimotze. So, emalo, so I might think that you wouldn't be allowed to feed these chayas. So, v'itana chaya, and if we would only teach a chaya, and say you can even feed them, since certainly an animal, so mishum di mishayr mihas matzna. So actually, you can also make the argument that actually the fact that a chaya, whatever it doesn't eat, it puts away, is actually a feature, because then you won't be over on Bal Yirah anymore. You might be over on Bal Yimatzeh, that you could technically find it, but you can't see it at least. So if we only had chaya, I might think that, well, you can feed a chaya because whatever it doesn't eat, it's just going to stash away. And okay, you might be over on Bal Yimatzeh, but at least you won't be over on Bal Yirah. But an animal, whatever it doesn't eat, is just going to leave there. And if you don't pay attention and you forget to burn it and get rid of it, well then you're going to end up having chametz around on Pesach, and you're going to be over on Bal Yirah and Bal Yimatzeh. So tzricha, that's why we need to say that you're allowed to feed both animals and chayas, and don't ask any questions. Ofis lamali, okay, but what are birds doing, Darton? So I did the Tana Behim of Chaya Tani Nami, Ofis. The Gemara basically says, because why not? What the heck? Once we already said Behema and Chaya, why not mention Ofis? So now the Gemara, the Mishnah had said that you'd be allowed to sell your chametz to a Gentile, and as long as you can eat it, you could sell it. So pshita, this is obvious. So lafuke mehai tana. So it's to exclude the following brisa. The Tanyas we learn in the brisa. Beishamei omrim says Beishamei lo yimkor adam chametzo lenachri elim ken yodea bo sheyichle kodem Pesach. Very interesting. So Beishamei say that you're only allowed to sell chametz to a Gentile on Erev Pesach if you can be certain that he's going to eat it before Pesach. But if he's still going to have it come Pesach, that's going to be a problem, because you got to get rid of it. It's not enough just to get it out of your possession, you have to get it out of existence. Whereas Beisila says no. As long as you're allowed to eat it, you're allowed to sell it. Once you've sold it, it's not your responsibility anymore. You don't need to make sure that it gets entirely consumed before Pesach begins. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, he adds an interesting note, which is Omer kutach v'chomine kutach also limkor shloshim yom kodem Pesach. Kutach is this dip we've seen a few times before, and the point is that you can keep it around for a while. It can last a long time. So he says also limkor shloshim yom kodem Pesach. You're not even allowed to sell it to a non-Jew 30 days before Pesach, because since we know that it's something that will be preserved, so then we have to be concerned that it's going to be around on Pesach. So don't sell it within 30 days of Pesach, but more than 30 days, and that would be okay. Okay, we said in the Mishnah that as long as you could sell it, it's permitted ba'ana. Pshita, isn't that obvious? Interesting. So the Gemara actually says, well, yeah, it's obvious if you assume that we're talking about before chametz is asur. Yeah, before chametz is asur, it's mutar ba'ana, sure. But the interesting thing here is that we're talking about actually that while chametz was still allowed, you actually burnt it. you burnt the chametz. And it's letting us know that if you burnt the chametz before the time was up, so then you can, singed it. So it was, burnt, but I guess not like ashes. So it would still be mutter ba'anoah even after zmano, since you already singed it and burnt it. Okay. Over zmano also ba'anoah also. Once the time passes, then you're not allowed to get benefit from it anymore. Okay, pshita, that's obvious. So tzrich l'shah is derabanan. No, so what it's talking about is the shah is derabanan. Kilu, let's say the 5th hour, or even the 6th hour, right? According to the 6th hour. So it's also ba'anoah according to everybody. You have to burn it. But midoraisa, it's really not also ba'anoah until the 7th hour. So what we're saying is that even the midirabanan times are going to be also ba'anoah. The Amr of Gidol, Amr of Chia bar Yosef, Amr of Yochanan, Amr Kaddish, Mishishos, Ulmailes. We saw the other day somebody who betroths a woman, on the 6th hour and up on Erev Pesach, afilu b'chitei kordanisa, even if he uses chitei kordanisa, which are very thick, and the chances of them becoming chametz if water gets on them is very slim. Ein chosh in the kiddushin, we don't consider it to be kiddushin because at that point it's already also to get anoah from chametz. Okay, so we see we're very stringent when it comes to getting anoah from chametz once it's already also midirabanan. Okay. I think we suggested the other day that maybe he should just use a ring or something. And you shouldn't use the chametz to light a tanur v'chirayim. Pshita, that's obvious, right? To light an oven and a stove. Isn't that obvious? If you're not allowed to get benefit from it, certainly you shouldn't be using it to light your oven or stove. Lo tzricha, the Rabbi Yehuda. It's needed for Rabbi Yehuda to amr in bir chametz elasrei. For Rabbi Yehuda, it said in our Mishnah that the way that you get rid of chametz is by burning it. I may have thought, so since Rabbi Yehuda says that, well, you got to be burning the chametz anyways, so maybe while you're burning it, get benefit from the heat, kamash malan, or I guess get benefit from the oven. So kamash malan, that no, it's not like that. You don't play games. Don't use the chametz to burn. To light your stove and feed 2 birds with 1 seed. Rather, burn it on its own thing and don't get any benefit from it. Okay? Interesting. So now we get to an interesting sugi over here. Amar Chizkiah, says Chizkiah, minayin l'chometz b'Pesach she'aser ba'anoah. Okay. How do we know that chometz and Pesach, it's not just that you're not allowed to eat it, it's not just that you're not allowed to see it, it's not just that you're not allowed to find it, you're also not allowed to get any benefit from it. How do we know that? Shneimar, as the pasuk says, lo ye'achel chametz, that chametz may not be eaten. If I have any grammar geeks like me, so of course ye'achel is, who could tell me? Nifal, passive, and it means that chametz should not be eaten on Pesach. Lo ye'bo heter achila, there shouldn't be any permissible, any way to eat it. Meaning, let's say you have chametz and you want to sell it to a non-Jew, and that would be considered getting benefit from it. So now it's not yours anymore, you're selling it, but now the non-Jew can eat it, right? So we say that that's going to be a problem. You cannot get any benefit or enable any benefit to happen from it. It just must be burnt, and that is that. So lo ye'achel chametz must not be eaten. Lo ye'bo heter achila, there shouldn't be any kind of permissible way for it to be consumed. Rather, you must just destroy it beforehand. Now, we get to this interesting sugya, time of the kasav achmana lo ye'achel chametz. Now, Chizkiah is specifically learning out because there's lo ye'achel chametz. Chametz should not be eaten. Ha lo kasav lo ye'achel, but if it wasn't written in the nifal, in the passive, let's say it was written lo yochal chametz. So havamina isra achila mashma isra noah lo mashma. Well, then that would mean that it would only be asur ba'achila, but not asur ba'noah. So if it would just say lo yochal chametz, do not eat, or lo tochal chametz, don't eat chametz, well then that would mean, okay, don't eat it, but I could get benefit from it. The fact that it says lo ye'achel chametz, that what does it say? Yeah, lo ye'achel chametz, that so it means that chametz should not be eaten and don't even get any benefit from it. Okay. The thing is, ufligid Rabbi Abo, this argues on Rabbi Abo, to Rabbi Abo, That whenever it says lo yocha lo socha lo sochlu, whenever it says don't eat, i.e. in the kal, and it's just like the regular kind of thing, tense. So, well, not tense, I guess. I don't know, what do you call that? I don't know, class? I don't know, but whenever it just says like the regular, like not passive thing, right? Lo yocha, lo socha, lo sochlu, echad isser achila ve'echad isser ana b'mashma. It's not just the isser achila, but even the isser ana. So whereas Chizkiah said it would have to be nif'al, it would have to be lo ye'achel, in order for it to be aser ba'ana, says Rabbi Bo, no, it doesn't have to be ye'achel, it could even be yochal, and that would still imply aser ba'ana. Ad she'ifayit l'cha hakasav k'derech she'peirit l'cha b'nevela, until the pasuk explicitly lets you know that you're allowed to get benefit from it, as it does by nevela, right? So according to Rabbi Bo, if it says lo yochal, lo socha, lo sochlu, so then that is, right, any of those words, so then that is enough to indicate that not only may you not eat it, you also may not get benefit from it. The exceptions being where the Torah lets us know the exception, such as by nevela. The Tanya is, we learn in a brisa, lo sochlu kol nevela. Don't eat any nevela. So there you go. There's that lo sochlu. And we're saying that according to Rabbi Abba, that means don't eat it, but also don't get benefit from it. Right? But here by nevela, the pasuk specifically says, but in this case, you would be allowed to give it to the ger in your midst, ba'achala, and you can eat it. Now you might be asking, why would you be allowed to give nevela to a convert? It's not a reference to a convert, it's a reference to somebody who's not Jewish, but what's called a ger toshav. He's not Jewish, but he accepts that he's not going to worship avodah zarah. So he's called a ger toshav, as opposed to a nochri, is somebody who doesn't accept not to do avodah zarah. So we're saying that you're allowed to give nevela to a ger toshav, or you could sell it to a Gentile. So all I know from here, if I just have a strict reading of the pasuk, all I know is that you're allowed to give the nevela. What's a nevela? Nevela is an animal that was not slaughtered, right? So you're not allowed to eat it. So you're allowed to give it to a ger toshav, and that you're allowed to sell it to a Gentile, to a nachri. How do I know that actually not only is it limited to giving to a ger toshav and selling to a nachri? How do I know that I can even sell it to a ger toshav? So there, Tamaloma, the pasuk says, La ger asher b'sharecha titnena o machor. Right, so the pasuk says that you can give it to the ger toshav o machor, or you can even sell it. Meaning it says o machor l'nachri, or you can sell it to a Gentile. But if you kind of stop it at after o machor, so it means la ger asher b'sharecha titnena o machor. You can give it to the ger toshav, or you can even sell it. L'nochri b'nesina b'nayin. And how do I know that to a nochri, to a Gentile, not only can I sell it to him, I can even give it to him. Tamalomar titnena va'achala o machor l'nochri. That it says, really like ger titnena, but if you drop ger, it says titnena v'achala o machor l'nochri. That you can give it to him and he will eat it, or sell it to him, and we're talking about to a Gentile. So nimtzeis omer, so what do we see? Echad ger v'echad nachri b'mimchir b'minesina. That both by a ger toshav and by a nachri, you can either sell it to him or give it to him. Divrei Reb Meir, that is the words of Reb Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda dvarim kichsavon. That you have to take it literally. That you can give this nevela to a ger toshav, and you can sell it, right? Lager b'nesina, you give it to ger toshav, l'nachri b'mechira, and you sell it to a nachri, but you can't do vice versa. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say that we have to take the pasuk literally? So he says, well, because, if it's true like Reb Meir is arguing, that you can sell and give to either a nachri or a ger, so lichtov rachmana lager shabshercha titnenu va'achala umachor. So then the pasuk should say that you can give it to a ger and sell it. Oh, lamli, why does it say or? It must be to say that they're separate. That either you can give it to a ger, or you could sell it to a nochri, but not both. Reb Meir says, "Oh, lahaktim nisina deger lemchir denachri." So Reb Meir says that the point of the "oh," it's not to say that, to separate them and to say that you specifically give to a ger and sell to a nachri. No, rather you can do both to both. You can give or sell to a nachri or a ger. What's the point of "oh"? "Oh" is to say that there is, however, a priority list, right? There is a priority, and that priority goes to the ger versus the nochri. Rabbi Yehuda says, I don't need a pasuk to teach me that preference goes to the nochri, to the ger. Well, since you're commanded to preserve the life of a ger, but not necessarily of a nochri, well then, so I don't need a pasuk to say that precedence goes to the ger. I can just assume that based on the fact that I'm commanded to give him life, to give him chayus. Okay, fine. So what do we see from there? So we see from there that specifically when it comes to nevela, the pasuk teaches that nevela is mutar b'hana. And the idea being that I wouldn't have known that otherwise, because it says lo sochlu kol nevela, don't eat nevela. Sochlu, according to Rabbi Abou, tochlu means iser achila and iser ana. However, specifically when it comes to nevela, the pasuk says, the Torah says, don't apply that to here to say that nevela is also b'hana. Rather, over here you can give it or sell it to a ger or to a nochri. And the Gemara is now about to actually say, well, that may make sense more according to Meir. How does Rabbi Yehuda explain it? So let us go weiter a shtickle now. So the Gemara says, B'shlam Rabbi Meir. Okay, so I understand Rabbi Abou's opinion according to Meir, meaning, so Rabbi Abou is saying that whenever it says lo sochlu, it means lo yochlu, lo sochlu, lo sochal. It means that it's asur b'achila and also asur b'hana. Okay? Except where the pasuk specifically tells you that it's mutar b'hana, such as by nevela. Well then, that makes sense according to Reb Meir. De Amar, echad ger, ve'echad nachri, that both by a ger toshav and by a nachri, bein b'mechira, bein b'nesina, you're allowed to give it to either a ger or a nachri. You can sell it to them. Let's read that again. From the fact that we need the pasuk to say that nevela is mutar b'hana, that implies that all the other places where there's an isur achila in the Torah, asurin bein b'achila bein b'hana, they're also both by achila and b'hana. Meaning, Rabbi Abou can effectively make the argument that whenever it says lo yochlu lo sochal, lo yochal lo sochal lo sochlu, it means it's also ba'achila and also ba'ana. However, there's an exception by nevela. By nevela, you're allowed to get hana. You can sell or give to a nachri or to a ger. It's no problem. Now, if you would say that lo yochal lo sochal lo sochlu is only an iser achila, but you're allowed to get hana from it, then what's the chiddush by nachri? That you're allowed to get hana by a nachri. You can sell it, you can give it to a nachri or a ger, right? That, of course, why shouldn't I be allowed to give it or sell it to a nachri or a ger? It only says lo yochal lo sochal lo sochlu, you're not allowed to eat it, but you're allowed to get hana. So from the fact, says Rabbi Abou, according to Reb Meir, from the fact that specifically by a nevela, the Torah goes out of its way to say that you're allowed to get hana from it, that implies that in every other place where you're not allowed to eat it, you're also not allowed to get hana. Fine, straightforward. But Ella, Rabbi Yehuda, the Amr l'dvarim kichsavam uda asa. But what about according to Rabbi Yehuda? According to Rabbi Yehuda, he says, actually take the pasuk literally. That specifically you're allowed to give the nevela to a ger, and you're allowed to sell it to a nochri, but not vice versa. So how do we know that all the other places where it says that you're not allowed to eat something, how do we know it's also asur b'hana? Because meaning, I could theoretically make the argument that every place where it says lo yochal lo sochal lo sochlu, it means that you're not allowed to eat it, but you are allowed to get hana. you are allowed to get hana from it. And actually, the Torah is being more stringent when it comes to nevela and saying that even though in general, when something is also to eat, you're allowed to get hana from it, but when it comes to nevela, there are specific rules. It's not just a free-for-all when it comes to nevela. When it comes to nevela, there are actually stringencies, which is that you have to give it specifically to a ger, and you have to sell it specifically to a nochri. So you can make the argument that in general, lo yochel, lo sochel, lo sochlu means that don't eat it, but you can get hana from it. And when it comes to nevela, there are additional stringencies that it must be given to a ger and sold to a nochri. So since I can make that argument, how would Rabbi Abba continue to assert that lo yochel, lo sochel, lo sochlu means you're not allowed to eat it and you're not allowed to get hana from it? How does he make that make sense according to Rabbi Yehuda's view that by nevela it means specifically do not give it to a ger and sell it to a specifically you're allowed to give it to a ger and sell it to a nochri. Fine. So nafkele milakelav tashlichun also. So Rabbi Abba would explain that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we would learn that in general, in Isra Achila is also in Isra Hana from Treifa. That in the context of Treifa, it says lakelav tashlichun also, that you're allowed to feed it to a dog. Also atamashich lakelav v'atamashich lakelav kol isurin shebatorah. That specifically nevela, that specifically treifa, you're allowed to feed to the dogs and get hana from it. But every other hana in the Isser Achila in the Torah, you would not be allowed to get hana from. So he doesn't learn it out from, meaning so according to Rabbi Abba, who wants to assert that lo yochel, lo sochel, lo sochel means you can't eat it, you also can't get hana from it. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, through the view of Rabbi Yehuda, you would have to say that the proof really comes from treifa, where we have to say specifically by treifa, you're allowed to feed it to a dog, implying that by other places where you're not allowed to eat it, you wouldn't be allowed to feed it to your dog, i.e. you would be asur b'hana. Reb Meir, also atamashel chakelev, v'atamashel chakelev, chulin shenishchatu ba'azara. So now the question is, well then, going back to Reb Meir, based on Reb Meir's view, so you can learn out from nevela that since by nevela we say that it's mutar ba'ana, that implies that by all the others it would be asur ba'ana. So what do I need lakelav tashlichun also? So for that we learn out also atamashich hakelav, that treifa you're allowed to throw to your dog and get hana from it. V'atamashich hakelav chulin shenishchatu ba'azara. Aha. But if you have chulin shenishchatu ba'azara, who could tell me what that is? So chulin shenishchatu ba'azara is chulin, a regular animal that you slaughter in the azara of the temple. Now in that case, you're not allowed to eat it, and we're saying that you're not allowed to get hana from it either. So we're saying that you're allowed to get hana from a treifa, but you're not allowed to get hana from chulin shenishchatu ba'azara. And according to Rabbi Abba would say that according to Reb Meir, that is what you learn out from lakelav tashlichun also. Okay, what about according to Rabbi Yehuda? Right, because he learns out from lakelav tashlichun also that in general, however, things that you can't eat, you can't get hana from. So how does he know that chulin shenishchatu ba'azara you're not allowed to get hana from? So he would say chulin shenishchatu ba'azara lav d'oraisa. He would say, well, that is not midoraisa. We don't learn that out from the Torah. Fine, that would be midorabanan. Okay, that was daf chaf aleph of Masechta Pesachim. It was really cool, right? Right. So what are some of the things that we learned today? So we learned about takala, right? That there was Rabbi Yossi's concern about takala, about things happening, negative things. Rabbi Yossi says that we're concerned that like if you leave like wine around, that's truma tmea, you might end up drinking it. Okay. Then we finished the first perek of Masechta Pesachim. We moved on to the next perek, the second perek. There was a bunch of things that we talked about there, such as once you're no longer allowed to eat hametz, then you're no longer allowed to. If you can eat chametz, you can feed it to your animal. If you're not allowed to eat chametz, then you can't feed it to your animal. We revisited the three machlokas between Reb Meir, Reb Yehuda, and Reb Gamliel about when you have to stop eating chametz in our Pesach. We're not going to get into that now. We talked about selling chametz to a Gentile. So Beis Shammai says that if you sell hametz to a Gentile before Pesach, you have to be able to ensure that it's going to be eaten before Pesach, because otherwise, it's not okay. You got to make sure it's gone before Pesach starts. Beis Hillel says, as long as you could eat hametz, you could sell it, and once the non-Jew has it, he can do whatever he wants with it. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira has an interesting opinion. He points out that sort of things that preserve well, like these dips, these kutachs, don't sell them within 30 days of Pesach, because then you have to be concerned that it'll still be around on Pesach. Interesting. We saw the machloket between Chizkiah and Rabbi Abou about how to understand an Isra Achila and Isra Anah. Does it include an Isra Anah or not? A prohibition against getting benefits. So Chizkiah's opinion was specifically if the word is written in a passive way, like by chametz, like lo ya'achel chametz. So in that case, it would mean not only do you not eat it, but you don't even get benefit from it. But if it's just lo yochal, lo sochal, lo sochlu, it means don't eat it, but you're allowed to get benefit. Rabbi Abou says no. Lo yochal, lo sochal, lo sochlu also means that don't eat it and also don't get benefit from it. And then we got into a machlokes in Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda regarding nevela, that Rabbi Meir's opinion is that you are allowed to give it or sell it to either a ger toshav or a nochri. And Rabbi Yehuda says that no, we have to take the pasuk literally. You can give it to a ger toshav, you could sell it to a nochri. Okie dokie, that was Daf Chaf Aleph. Peace.